We're rolling. Mics are going on. I'll do a Hollywood clap, even though you don't need it anymore, Chris.
Yeah, we don't
We
like
used
the,
to
we
in the
don't like
early
the
days,
Hollywood
used to
clap.
do a clap
We
like
had
we
too
do.
much of like a, you know, when you ask someone at the very beginning,
Yeah.
well, what is your business? It's like, what is my business?
Yeah.
It's so
someone says, who are you?
Yeah. It's like, I don't even know my own name right now. So
Yeah.
we're phasing that out.
Great.
More conversational start.
I think the best way, especially considering the journey that HumanOS has come on to be to where it is now, is to actually ask how, a bit about you and a bit
You can
about
ask me who I am.
Yeah. Who are you
Who
again?
are you?
Where do you want me to start with that?
Well, I saw in your LinkedIn bio, perhaps, as we were getting to know you before we met face
Yeah.
to face, we saw that you came from a corporate background.
Yes.
And you've switched from that type of environment, let's say, into a kind of wellness and fitness, but an all-encompassing kind of platform. That's quite a change, quite a transition. So, you know, what was it that prompted you to make that change, and what have you brought from the corporate world into this new product you've built?
Yeah. So when I get asked this question, I always try and explain it as my career has been a very spaghetti-like career, which is beautiful and weird and wonderful and completely unplanned. I've always been fascinated by human health, human behavior, the human brain. I studied psychology at university. I originally thought that that's where my career would go, and I'd go down like the clinical psychology route. So after I graduated, I was going to take a year out and then do my master's and go into the clinical psychology industry. About 3 weeks after I graduated, my dad was given 3 months left to live. He was a really, really healthy man. He never had a cigarette. He wasn't a big drinker. He was out on his bike every morning doing 40, 50K. So it was a huge shock to him, to me, to the family. So for the next 3 months, it was just very much one foot in front of the other, navigating like this time of grief and fear and overwhelm. And it was the first time in my life that I'd ever been like presented with something like that, you know, where something's so out of your control and such a shock to your world. So after 3 months, he was still alive. He was a very Italian man. And he turned around to me in a very Italian manner and told me I had to go get a job. I was like, sorry, we missed the past 3 months.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And so, you know, I couldn't go and get a job in the field I wanted to. I didn't have the cognitive capacity to go and add to my qualifications and do that. And so I had to like really ask myself, well, what do I do here? And at the time, I was just solely motivated by money. Like, the only thing I cared about was either buying my dad his health or buying him a Ferrari. That was it. That was the mission. And so I was left with two choices. It was, you know, you're young, you're motivated by money, but you don't really have a qualification that's going to get you into a job where you could get a really good salary unless it's tech sales or recruitment. No offense to either of those industries, but it's how a lot of people fall into them. And so for reasons I still don't know to this day, but I trust the universe, I chose tech sales. At the time, I thought the cloud was a satellite in the sky. Literally. I couldn't even work a mobile phone. And so I made a deal with my dad that if I got the first job I applied for, he'd give me £500. It's what you do with a dying man. And questionable choices were made. And so I applied for this job and I got this job, and my first £500 went on my first suit, which I was really sad about. But the following week, I found myself on this sales floor of 800 people. I was in the grad team, one of two women. I was one of the youngest people in the company, and I was learning about tech sales. And so over the course of the coming year, I started putting my all into this job. I was on this mission to make a lot of money. The whole time, my dad was getting progressively more unwell. So there was a lot of displacement, I guess. I ended up working sort of 20-hour days, 7 days a week at times. I was completely neglecting my own wellness needs. I just really wanted to help my dad. And when my dad did eventually pass away, I ended up in hospital, and the doctor said that I'd gone through this really extreme 2-year burnout, to the point where my cortisol levels, so my stress hormone, was so high, my stomach stopped working. So I no longer had stomach walls. I couldn't digest my food. I couldn't sleep lying down. I had fibromyalgia, so I was having pains from head to toe. And I was just mentally and physically completely broken. So I quit the job, took a year out. I swapped my penthouse in Bloomsbury and my Louboutins for a tuk-tuk called Tina. She was really cool. We traveled Sri Lanka together.
Cool.
I went and lived off the east coast of Australia for a bit and had no phone signal for 6 months. I just went from like complete opposite ends of the spectrum. But during this year and during my travels, I was doing a lot of my own personal development and really trying to understand my body and my health. I didn't want to, the doctor said I'd have to have endoscopies every 6 months for the rest of my life, be on medication for the rest of my life. And although I feel really fortunate to live in a society where we have access to medication, that's not what I wanted for myself. I wanted to actually understand, how have I got here and how do I get out of here? And so I guess that was then, without realizing at the time, was the first sort of pieces to the puzzle of my wellness journey. And it was very much just for myself and my own health. And then I came back to the UK and added to my qualifications. I went into coaching. And this was really just driven from the fact that I wanted to help just one person go through what I went through, but have the support and the education and the inspiration that I never had. And so I started coaching very quickly. I was doing like 50 hours of coaching a week. I was looking at health from a very holistic perspective. And this is like 6 years ago. So this is pre-pandemic, before everyone was a holistic coach, before every 21-year-old was a life coach. It was not what it is now. And so my business just grew really, really quickly. And then over the course of that time, this little thing happened. You may have heard of it, COVID, that little thing. Yeah. And so I was like, great, as soon as I'm about to have my life together, curveball comes once again. And my business actually grew because I was doing so much of the holistic health. People really needed that then. And so I started working with other coaches, bringing in other specialists. But I just had this like burning feeling inside of me where I love business and I love strategy and I love solving really big problems. And so although I loved the coaching, I was like, there needs to be more to this. And where companies could no longer take their employees to get drunk, they couldn't take them on fancy holidays, they couldn't, do all the things they would have previously done to benefit them, I was like, brilliant, there's an opportunity there. So I decided to start delivering talks. And reaching out to companies I used to work at and with and delivering wellbeing talks. And then that led to me helping them build and design their wellbeing strategies. And that all started to grow. So then within like a year of doing that, I was talking to CDW, American Express, Snapchat, University of Cambridge. Like these huge companies were coming to me for my time and advice. And I was like, maybe I'm onto something here. Like, this is cool. And then again, I was like, there's something missing here. And I guess it was like the experience from studying psychology, the experience in the corporate world, the experience coaching, that I saw this real problem where we could give the individual all the support they needed and all the expertise and all the guidance. But if they're still going into environments every day that are at their detriment, then you're only basically putting a plaster over the problem. And that then was like the first seeds of HumanOS. So I was like, okay, so how do I still do what I want to do, which is provide coaching to people and give everyone access to that coaching? But then actually, how do I get organizations to actually take this seriously? How do I provide them with the data and the insights and a platform in which allows them to build more effective business models? And that's sort of how it came about.
Wow. What a interesting kind of origin, and it makes total sense really when you understand the story. Out of interest, when you're speaking at companies like American Express and the other large names, are you speaking to their management team, or are you in that capacity speaking directly to the individuals who are working for American Express themselves as to how they can optimize their days? Or
a real mix. So myself and my coaches will go in, and sometimes we'll speak to management leadership, sometimes we'll be giving talks to all the employees. It depends on the company and the talk, so we tend to cover all areas.
Because it's not something you see very often, companies really taking this initiative by the horns.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of how this all came to be that companies love to take their staff out to get drunk
Yeah.
and to do activities like that. And of course, team building is thrown in there, and that's, I suppose, why they do it. But those activities aren't conducive to productivity in the company's behalf overall.
Yeah.
Are you starting to see post-COVID, even though it's finished now, companies kind of going in that trend where in fact they want to invest their money into wellness, nutrition, mental health, as opposed to the kind of nights out? Or is that still a sort of thing you're trying to convince them away from?
It's really interesting. I think when the pandemic hit, a lot of companies, rightly so, panicked. They were like, how on earth do we navigate this? Like, no one knows how long this is going to go on for. No one knows the impacts this is going to have on business, on culture, on society. And so they were deeply concerned for the survivability of the business and also for the well-being of their people. And so actually a lot of companies then started investing a lot of money into well-being solutions. The problem is, probably get myself in trouble here, but the problem is there was also a lot of companies from a well-being perspective that saw an opportunity in the market. They were like, well, hang on a minute, like everyone's spending money on corporate well-being now, so I'm a corporate well-being company. And so then what happened is organizations were investing loads of money into solutions. These solutions were largely ineffective because they hadn't been built in the correct way or actually from the correct place. And so now what we're seeing come a few years afterwards is a lot of companies have been burnt really badly. They've spent all this money on solutions that have been really ineffective. We then look at the sort of what I call the version 1 solutions, which are the more old school like EAPs that we see, and how, like I said to you before, like how low their engagement rates are. You know, they sit between like 2 and 4.9%. And so companies are either like, well, we've already got these EAPs in place and they're not used, or, well, actually we've invested in X, Y, and Z and they haven't worked. So coming through now as a company who's trying to disrupt this and educate and actually show how we're trying to do it differently and how we can actually get that engagement and add that value is quite a difficult conversation to have. And so, yes, on paper, companies might have more money for well-being, but actually getting them to spend that money in the correct places is still a really difficult conversation.
The cynicism that lives within inside me, of which there is a lot,
I didn't get that.
wonders if, you know, someone in your situation, you know, you've lived and breathed this, you know what this can do to an individual. Do you ever get a niggling feeling that companies are just using this as a box ticking exercise? You know, you're going in there and you're thinking to yourself, these guys aren't really interested. They're just using my services so that they can use that outwardly to say, hey, look how good we're doing.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two groups. There's the ones who have always done and approach their business in the way they do, and they have done really well through doing that. So they don't particularly think they have to change, and they very much do it as like a tick box exercise. So to the outside world, they look like they're taking it seriously. So they offer the workshops, they offer the benefits, but actually the culture is really toxic and flawed. And so it doesn't matter what you're offering them.
Yeah.
And then you have the other group who do genuinely care and do want to do something about it, but a lot of the time they are restricted by budgets, or they don't even have the energy or the capacity to think strategically and long term because they're so busy fighting fires in the day-to-day run-ins of the business that they find it really hard to move away from what those quick fixes are, whether that's, you know, the gym memberships or the free fruit or the workshops, which are all come from good places, but they're not fundamentally fixing the root of the issues, which is, as a society, how we are working right now is not sustainable.
It's a perk as opposed to a culture shift.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think before now, it's actually been really hard for companies to prove with real data and stuff like that they've collected that the wellness operations that their team is undertaking is actually positively affecting the company overall. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert in the space, but I've never seen that. And then as a consequence, it becomes more of a tick box exercise. And, you know, I've had a few, you collect meditation minutes in your platform. Is that something now that the company is going to be able to say, okay, well, you know, great, our employees are achieving this, and that has meant we've achieved this, you know, actually compare that data. Okay, so is this as freaky? If our team meditate 10 minutes a day, then in fact our sales go up.
Yeah.
That's a novelty I've not seen. Is that what HumanOS is going to be able to do?
I mean, Oxford University did a really fascinating study last year over 12,000 BT call centres. And they found that when they were rating them from 1 to 10 on this happiness scale that they'd created, when they improved happiness by just 1 point, they saw a 12% increase in weekly sales. And it's absolutely
nuts.
wild. And so what we're trying to do is be able to collect data effectively and then report on that data in a meaningful way using the types of Deloitte, Gallup and the other big industry leading providers to then actually create those connections within the data for them. Now, I could easily sit here and say, oh yeah, your ROI, you're going to get this many less days on presenteeism, they're going to get this much in productivity, XYZ, and any wellbeing company would sit here and give you some figures that they've curated that would suit them. But the fact of the matter is, it is still really hard to prove ROI in a tangible manner, but it is possible. But it's about collecting the correct data in the correct way. And the challenges for the business there are, so many individuals have survey fatigue. Like, how do you actually collect data that is reflecting what the whole workforce think as opposed to just what the people who are reporting on that data think or filling the surveys? And that's why we've done so much around on the platform, actually, how do we collect this data every day without people thinking it's a survey or that they're actually, having to input this? So what we've tried to do is make sure the employee is getting benefit from reporting on this data, and everything we do is anonymous anyway. And then how do we give that to the business in a meaningful way as well?
Okay, so their data is anonymous. The employee's data is?
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool, because that's very important. As you can just imagine team managers coming and nudging people on the arm saying, you're really actually quite happy today, aren't you?
Yeah.
To make sure that, their KPIs.
Aren't you?
I know you're happy today, but you're fired.
Yeah, big smiles, everybody, today.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does the data that is anonymous then get presented to the company that's using the product?
So what we try and do is we collect all different areas of health. So we look at things like their stress scores, their sleep scores, their emotions, even things like their hydration, their movement, because we know this all has a massive impact on performance. And so we have a random set of questions from our database that will be asked every day. And it's just like 2 to 3 questions. So it takes like 10 seconds for the user. We're gamifying that whole experience as well. So they get rewards and points, again, a link to external rewards. And so then we end up collecting a really rich data set. And so then we can start making those links between, okay, well, actually, we know that hydration is having this impact on this piece of performance, or stress levels are having a detrimental impact here. And then every 3 months, we can then look at the patterns of the behaviors from the last 3 months of the company. So each quarter, we can then sit down with them and say, okay, these are the bottlenecks, these are the challenges, this is what we suggest moving forwards. And as we grow, we have big plans around that and how to make that even more advanced.
In terms of scale, does approaching companies with a HumanOS app, does it still come with a lot of educational requirements?
Yeah, big time at the moment. I think a lot of companies do want to have employee wellbeing solutions in place. A lot of them do. But actually, there's a lot of education that needs to go around actually having one that works and why it works and why it's important for everyone in that organization to have it, not just companies are very quick to spend money on their most expensive populations. So whether that's the leadership teams, whether that's people with chronic disease, in each organization, it will vary. And they'll be more than happy to spend money there, but where they're less so happy is to spend more money making sure all employees have access to the correct resources. But we know, and especially now, it's becoming more and more apparent. You just see all the problems we are seeing in society. We know now that there's a report I read a few weeks ago, I think it was Gallup, that it suggested that only 13% of people in the UK are engaged at work. Last year, there was a 44% increase in suicidal thoughts in the workplace. Anxiety's on the rise, depression's on the rise. 32 is the average age of burnout. 70% of UK professionals have at least one symptom of burnout. Like, there's this whole host of challenges we are seeing and problems we're seeing that are on the rise. And so we know then from an expert perspective, you need to be looking at your organization as a whole, and it really has to be a cultural shift. And so what we try and do is that cultural piece is actually, if we can make every single person within your organization feel seen and heard and valued by the company, and make sure that individual is aligned to what your company aligns to, then we're going to see huge beneficial impacts on the business and that transformation piece. And that's where the education needs to be done. It needs to be a cultural shift, bottom up and top down.
I read an interesting statistic, and for me, I've got two questions for you off the back of it, one personal and one to do with HumanOS. And it was that 45% of founders feel burnout. So asking you as a personal question on it is, you started this podcast talking about how you ended up with HumanOS, going through burnout, and now you're a founder. And from speaking with you, from following you on social media, I can see that you're a busy person. Are you experiencing burnout? And if so, is it a different kind of burnout to the one that you felt when you were working?
I read that statistic and I was like, that statistic must be a lie. That must be closer to like 85. I just don't believe it. Yeah. I don't believe that only 45% of founders feel burnt out.
Yeah.
Like, life is a burnout when you're a founder. And yes, absolutely. I think when you're a founder and when you really care about what you're doing, and as a founder, you spend a lot of times doing things you don't really like doing, or you may not necessarily know loads about, and you have to wear those hats, and you have to be able to manage that and adapt really quickly. And that's really emotionally and physically taxing. And then, you have all the pressure of, well, you've put your heart and soul into something and you want that to work. So then the pressure that surrounds that is huge. So I think it can be really easy to fall into that trap of actually starting to go down that road where you stop performing how you should perform, and really your own wellness needs are not being met. So I definitely feel the pressure and I definitely feel the stress. I'm not the best at switching off, but I also know, like, I do this because health is such a privilege, and I know what it's like to have health ripped from me with my dad, with myself. And so I fundamentally know that no job is worth your health.
Yeah.
And it is easier said than done, but there's lots of things I try and do in order to try and make sure that I don't go back down that road. And I don't always get it right, but I think it's about being honest with yourself and your limits, and knowing there's going to have to be sacrifices, and what do you not mind sacrificing?
Yeah. Well, then commercially speaking, if let's say 50% of founders are feeling burnout,
still not high enough.
Let's say 60. Let's say a large percentage of founders are feeling burnout. Are they not the perfect kind of customer for HumanOS? They will understand it. Surely they are those who are in need of well-being.
We work a lot in sort of like the scale up stage, because you have a lot more forward thinking individuals at the top. You have a lot of younger workforces who really care about this stuff and like see this as an absolute fundamental if they're going into a workplace. Everyone's constantly talking about Gen Z and like how they approach work and what a challenge that is. And I'm like, well, Generation Alpha are going to be in the workforce in like 2 to 3 years. So like, if you thought you had problems now, like, you have nothing. And I really respect how they approach work. And I actually think, there's a lot of elements that are really good with how they approach work. There's elements that we have a responsibility to teach them. Like, things do not happen overnight. You have to get used to delayed gratification. You have to get used to working hard. There is going to be times you're going to have to work late. There is going to be times where you're going to have to sacrifice your social life. Like, that is just life, and that is a career. And unfortunately, you can't wrap people in bubble wrap, and nor should we. And so I think we do a lot of work in that space, not so much the startup phase, because especially if they're bootstrapping, even if they wanted to, with all the will in the world, they don't have money to spend on wellbeing solutions. So we go more like scale up, and then the companies who probably have been around longer, but who are now really interested in this area and want to be proactive about it. Because we always say we're like a preventative health solution.
Yeah.
And so it's those ones who like are thinking on the same page about it for now. But I always say in like 5 years' time, this is me with like my founder hat on. People are like, she's crazy. In 5 years' time, I have no doubt in my mind that people will apply for jobs who have HumanOS.
Yeah, because it's a sign that they prioritize health and wellness.
And we're just going to have such a name and a brand to have the best coaches in the world and such a cool platform that people want to be able to access. They'll look at like, what is your benefits package? Oh, they've got HumanOS. Great, I'm applying.
So how have you gone about ensuring that you have the best coaches on your app?
So I'm in a quite fortunate position there where, because I spent such a long time in the coaching field and in that industry, like I have so many contacts there. I must receive about 3 to 5 CVs a week from coaches who want to be part of the HumanOS team. And all my coaches are so incredibly skilled and good at what they do. They also then can refer within their specific fields. So for us, actually, that journey inside of things, touch wood, has been a bit easier, just because I've already got all the contacts and the network in place that I know who I can bring in and who I can trust to deliver like that best-in-class service.
When I saw on the product demo that we had a look at, that you guys capture and implement the data captured on smart devices like Apple Watches and stuff like that, which is cool. But out of interest, on a limitation kind of perspective, if a company takes up HumanOS and half of their workforce don't have an Apple Watch, let's say, is it a requirement on their part really that they then have to furnish their employees with those smart devices so that they can all take part in the same dashboards?
So what we do when we're releasing new features onto the platform, we do customer interviews like every 3 to 4 weeks. And that's how we then create our product pipeline and what features we're prioritizing and what services. And so when we started, we didn't have that AI integration piece with the wearables. That actually came from a lot of feedback from the customers and from the employees, where they're like, we'd love to be able to import our data onto here. And so then what we did was we created a way of then collecting the data from the wearables with the information we collect when they join the platform, because we don't want any forms to fill out on platform. We don't want any waiting time. So we've created the whole thing where within when you send a message, within 24 hours, you'll have a coach. Within the first week, you'll have your first coaching session, and you'll always see that coach until you decide to change. So we're trying to take a lot of the flaws that we've seen in other systems, or maybe going down the NHS route, and actually making sure we're overcoming that. But we do have one form that they fill out at the beginning. So we use that data and the wearable data, if they have it, to then give them that biological age so they can track how they're reversing their age. If they do not have a wearable, then they can still use all the features of the platform. They just won't have the biological age piece. And so it's not like a prerequisite of the company that they all have to have wearables. It's more, if they do have one and they want to use that feature, they absolutely can.
Because I understand. The big data play to me really excites me. You know, when we talk about HumanOS growing bigger and better and being in a lot of different businesses, and we talked about that study that they did on BT, and they just a single point moves the happiness percentage moves by 1 point. Their sales increased by 12%.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there's a big data play to be had here, where if you're capturing effectively that survey, but on, you know, a grander basis and in a far more specific metric perspective, you find out that your team walk X amount of steps per day and suddenly performance is increasing. And then you can start to really bury in to what makes the most difference to your workforce from a wellness perspective. And then people can invest their money in the right kind of places. Is the big data play part of your vision for HumanOS in kind of helping large businesses learn from their
Yeah, I think for me it comes from 2 places. Number one is like my own inner biohacking nerd. I love the fact that we can take this data and give it to employees in a really simple manner. And so health can be so overwhelming and it can be so confusing, and it's so, like, information's thrown in your face every day. You should have this diet, you should have this sleep routine, you should have this exercise thing. It's not like that. There is no one size fits all. We are all so different. So it's about finding what works for you. So we want to take that data and then give that data back to the employee in the most simple manner so they can find or work with the coaches to understand what works for them. On the other side, for those of the employees who do really love the data and love their wearables and things like that, like I love the fact that we can start like tracking their HRV. We can link their HRV to like their work stress. We can link that to when they might be suffering from presenteeism. We can then sort of start to look at when it might be a predictor of absenteeism, because we know the HRV is going to drop before they get ill. And so all those things, which then makes that's like a really sort of futuristic but cool thing to do, because then you can start to predict like when do companies need to look at getting someone else in, when do they need cover, when are going to be stressful times, when are going to be easier times, and that's pretty smart, if I do say so myself. But then on the other side of that, what we want to do is then, okay, we're collecting all this data. How do we give that to the organization? So you, again, in the most simple manner, how can you create links that they may not have thought about that is then actually having a massive detrimental impact on their business? And so taking that data and reporting on that in simple ways and comparing it with like the leading reporters to then present that to them in a way where they actually then start to see these data points that they hadn't connected before. And then they can understand their bottlenecks, and then they can start to build more effective wellbeing solutions. And I always say, like for me, wellbeing isn't about never experiencing stress. It's never about not working hard. It's not about switching off at 5 every day. It's about how do you perform at a high level sustainably, which is right now we are not. People think they are, but then it's like, well, why is heart disease, obesity, cancer, burnout, all of these things happening? It's because we're performing at a high level unsustainably. So if you can actually give people the data to allow how to do that in a sustainable manner, so you're always operating at a high level and you're recovering as hard as you're working, then you're unlocking some really cool elements for a business and business performance.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I hope to see this trend change so much that, in fact, HumanOS is just the kind of product that pierces the balloon. And in fact, we see companies taking food and nutrition much more seriously.
Yeah.
I think that actually, if you go into any company, typically a typical company cafeteria, providing a sink and a microwave, it's not conducive to productive work overall, and the company spites themselves. And if you gave people access to fresh fruit and vegetables,
yeah, it's absolutely wild. I mean, like for every cell in your body, you have 10 pieces of bacteria in your gut. And the two main predictors of good gut health is low stress and biodiversity of fruit and veg. Now, most people don't even know what their gut is, and they have no idea about the role the gut has on the brain and the performance. So 80%, without going too like nerdy here, but 80% of our neurotransmitters are manufactured in the gut. So our dopamine, our serotonin, our GABA, they're all made in the gut. So a lot of the time when we're experiencing anxiety, depression, stress, low productivity, lots of illness, it's actually not because the brain is doing anything wrong. It's because the gut can't make the neurotransmitters in the first place. And so if we're putting that into a nutrition perspective, and actually if your office is being really proactive about that, and you are providing people with biodiversity of fruit and veg in the office, with things like water, really simple things, and actually making them do these things, you are then going to see a huge impact on the way they are performing, and that in turn is going to make them feel better but also work better. And it's so simple.
But that's why I asked about the educational piece, because I feel like some companies, not very many people feel sorry for companies, but I'm sure some of them are trying, and they're swapping out their Coke Zeros for Huels, and they're swapping out their Mars bars for grenade bars, but they're all just a cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
And that's why the educational pieces I feel so important, because it's so good to monitor how you're feeling, monitor your exercise and track everything. But if you're then fueling your body with crap, you are ultimately just going to feel, you are what you eat, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's really important though to meet people where they're at. So as a coach or as a company, you can't go in and completely overhaul their own individual behaviors, because they won't stick to it. And so many times individuals, they want quick wins, and they always think intensity instead of consistency. And that's where we go wrong so much. And so actually it's like, how do we break it down for them? How do we make it simple? How do we make it manageable? It's not about, going and running one marathon. How do you become a runner? It's not about going and making one sale. How do you become a salesperson? And actually what we want to do is make that barrier to entry low, so the behaviors become habitual, and then we can add to them. And that's where that education comes in. It's like, okay, take a step back. Actually, what can we do to make this the first point, and then have that second goal, and then have that third goal, and taking them through that process, because otherwise they'll end up just setting themselves up for failure.
On the education point, when a company does engage with HumanOS and you guys on board, so to speak, and you integrate with them, does their pricing package force them in effect to sort of use a minimum amount of coaching hours and engagement with the experts? I presume that that's something they pay for upfront, so the employee doesn't have a kind of transaction with the coach. And so how have you managed to kind of like, do you see where I'm coming from? The sort of amount of access any single employee has to a therapist or to a nutritionist, and the pricing on that.
So we have done it as a subscription model per employee per month. And I have purposely built that around a completely uncapped coaching limit. And the reason I have done that, even though in business terms, people think, well, how is that a viable business model? Well, actually, my belief is if someone needs a coach, and we work on the upside and the downside. So what I mean by that is a lot of our competitors will work on the stress and the anxiety and depression. And yes, all things we need to be focusing on, which we absolutely do. But we also want to focus on how do we take your employees from good to great? And so, how do we get you looking your best for your wedding? How do we get you climbing Kilimanjaro? How do we get you PBing in your marathons? And that requires real human coaching. And so I am not going to limit how many sessions a person needs with their coach. That's not why I created this. So how do I counteract that and make sure it's still a viable business model? By making the technology and the platform so accessible and for individuals to get so much benefit outside of the coaching as well, that they are getting answers to their question and support and education, whether it's through our masterclasses and our live masterclasses that we run every month. And then they can also engage with each other then, so creating that community, whether it's through the rewards and the gamification. Like I was saying to you earlier, with our next phase of development, with all the AI pieces we want to bring in that I'm not going to speak about on here, in case anyone with more money than me right now takes my ideas. But with those pieces as well, then what you're doing is you are driving a lot of value and driving a lot of the demand through the tech. So then actually the individuals who do need that coaching can have that coaching and can have so unlimited.
So if you're listening to this and you're an employee of a large company and you want access to the best therapists, the best nutritionists, it might be worth mentioning this kind of product to your boss and your management team, because that's actually, you can benefit effectively from economies of scale in that respect and increase your productivity at the same time. Yeah,
so we have therapists, personal trainers, nutritionists, osteopaths, men's health experts, female hormone experts, sleep experts, something else I think I've forgotten. The coaching team is growing, and that's exactly why we want all of these coaches in a very holistic manner to be able to provide these services.
Do you think that, do you have any problem with, I take it your clients are mostly based in the UK at the moment, is that the case?
We have clients in Australia, UK and across Europe.
Okay, and in that event, are they connecting with experts in their particular field from around the world, or are they connecting with local experts to them?
All over. Yeah, so they might get some in their local areas, they might get some further afield.
Okay.
From a foundational aspect, did you receive investment? Will you seek investment?
I raised investment last year in March for our pre-seed round, and then I will likely do our seed round towards the end of the year.
Is there a sort of particular prompt in mind that you have? I know you've got some big plans and a grand vision, but is there something that money will sort of help take? Is it a case of scaling the business, or is it a case of adding more functionality to the platform?
Technology is expensive.
Yeah, right.
So,
amen.
And there's a lot I want to do with that technology. So with the way I've sort of done the budgets on that next raise and where I want that money to be allocated to, there'll be a lot on the technology, more in the marketing, starting to make some key hires as well, and start to grow out the team are like the main areas that I'm really interested in right now.
And how has building the team been? I take it you've got a team a clever team behind this product who've built the platform so far.
Yeah.
How's that journey been, creating your sort of own team? And
so we had front end, back end engineers and an app developer on the tech side of things. And I've got like 12, 13, 14 coaches. I love people. So for me, it's been really fun. And hiring people that are really aligned to HumanOS, and hiring people that are incredible at what they do and can really bring their own stance to it and their own take on it. I think, for me, doing HumanOS to improve the well-being and change how fundamentally as a culture we approach work, just that small mission, I have to be practicing what I preach. And so with all my team, like, their well-being is my absolute priority. And I want them to be growing and developing and communicating with each other and learning from one another. And that diversity and that whole cultural piece has to be from us and for them firstly, because then they're going to go and give that to our customers. And so that's really, really important to me.
You see a lot of different companies, and you've spoken in this about your expertise in wellness and fitness. I'm curious, do you think that a company suffers in this category when they go fully remote, or do they suffer when they get everybody to work on site? We typically see it's kind of like a Marmite decision.
They suffer either way.
Okay, interesting.
Because you get different personalities in both, and some people want to be remote and some people want to be in the office. And so that's why I personally think a flexible hybrid approach is the most important. Loneliness is on the rise. Loneliness between the age of 16 and 29, they are more chronically lonely than the over 70s. 20% more lonely than over 70s. And that's just staggeringly concerning. And there's a lot we need to do to make sure that we are combating this, because we live in a more technologically connected world than ever before. But as human beings, we are so disconnected. And that disconnect can happen whether you're a remote worker, whether you're in the office. Loneliness isn't how many people you're around, it's the quality of those relationships. So organizations, I think they get so caught up in how do I support them, and should I be doing work from home? Should I be doing remote? Actually, no, where your focus needs to go is, what is your culture? How connected are your employees to each other wherever they're working from? Because if they're disconnected and they're not working together and they're not as a team and they're not collaborating and they're not communicating, you're going to have huge detrimental impacts to the business either way. And so again, it comes back to that culture piece and how are you embedding that communication, that emotional intelligence, those real, genuine human connections between your employees, because then you're going to have massive benefits again for the business.
Yeah.
The companies that use HumanOS, what are the obligations on them in order to get the most out of the app? So is it simply a case of, this is great, I'm going to give it to all of my employees, and at that point they can be like, great, we'll let the app do the rest of it? Or are there obligations on them to do workshops and things of that nature?
Yeah, so what we do is we have like a happiness manager at our side. I just like the name. I was like,
that's a great role.
Yeah.
I was like, who can be angry at a happiness manager? Exactly. Yeah. But we do also then make sure each of our customers have sort of HumanOS advocates their side. Depends on the size of the company, depends how many we have. Because again, the education needs to be for the employees as well. So, the majority of employees are low in energy, overworked, stressed, overwhelmed. They need to be educated. And why should they use another platform? Why do they have to learn another thing? So it's our responsibility and the company's responsibility to get the buy-in of the employees as well. So we do need boots on the ground their side. We do need people shouting about it, singing about it. We do a lot in our onboarding process to really handhold the employees through that, to really build relationships with the employees from our perspective, so they know who we are, they're familiar with our faces, with myself, with the coaches, so that they then feel more comfortable. And then once they're on, they can be left to their own devices, because they're getting so much value from it that they don't need to be told to use it.
Have you come across the query of employees wanting to keep their data when they leave the company? If they've been, for example, filling out and using HumanOS for 2 years, they've got some pretty compelling data there. I appreciate it's anonymous from the perspective of the company, but it seems to me in the future that an employee would be more likely to spend their time authentically completing that kind of information if they knew that they could have just at least their own individual information as an asset when they leave the company, either to show perhaps to the next employer. Because as I move in, I've got my CV that talks about my day-to-day responsibilities, but it's also cool to be able to say, and, you know, I have done this much, and you could compare it perhaps to an organization. And especially when we imagine a world where multiple companies are using it and the data could be brought across.
I have never thought about that, and I'm going to use that.
Yeah, right.
Thank you. I will do some revenue split with you on that one. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I mean, they can export their data, but for sure. We haven't actually ever been asked for it in that way. But
it's with that anonymous survey completion, because you mentioned survey fatigue, which is absolutely real.
Yeah.
But there's also that case of, you know, is this authentic to myself? And it's very useful data. Yeah. So and I think Web3 actually is going to unleash those kind of possibilities for making data unique to somebody. But interesting.
It's Founder of the Year.
Yes.
Hustle Awards.
And the company is up for something as well, right?
Most influential women in the industry, Founder of the Year, and Most Innovative Tech, and Reader's Choice Award.
There's a lot of them.
You've got to leave some for the others. It's too much.
What's the reaction been? Obviously, beside the vanity side of it, of, you know, friends and family, like, that's very cool. But commercially speaking, has the profile of HumanOS jumped up since the awards nominations were announced?
It was only like last week, so it's all quite relatively new. The actual awards are in July, when we'll then, I presume, we'll see more like PR around it. I mean, Startup Magazine and Hustle Awards are doing loads around it, which is really cool, and we've definitely had a bit more outreach. I think because I live and breathe it, it's very hard to reflect on.
Don't get that bird's eye view, really.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a lot of people come to me now and they're like, oh, I was at this event yesterday and blah-de-blah said that they knew you. And I'm like, I don't know blah-de-blah. And they're like, no, I know, but they've seen all the work that HumanOS is doing. Now. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, like, my coaches will come to me and they'll be like, oh, this person's reached out to me. They really want to speak to you about like, this potential opportunity or this for their company. So I know what we're doing is working because people are starting to know who we are. And whenever I have conversations with people and I say that we launched in August, they're like, what? Like, you've been going around years. And I'm like, it feels like that for me as well. But no, we launched in August. So I think, you know, we are definitely creating good awareness and good momentum. We've got almost 2,000 users now. So like we're going in the right direction. But it's early days and there's a big sort of job to do.
We love to raise the names of competitors. We don't know a competitor necessarily to HumanOS because it's quite a unique offering, really, especially in its comprehensiveness. But is there a sort of legacy system that corporations are used to using, enterprise companies and SMEs and scale-ups are used to using, that you might be able to just highlight to the benefits of HumanOS compared?
So I come back to that, like version 1, version 2. So like version 1 in terms of wellbeing offerings are like your classic EAPs. What they do really well is the whole medical insurance piece. We don't touch that because we are a preventative health solution. So you've never come to us for insurance. They do that bit really well. And then what I call it the V2. And this isn't like me just giving like the wishy-washy salesperson response, but I generally don't call them competitors because I think actually what these V2 solutions are trying to do is genuinely make a difference and do so and have an impact that really creates value. And so for me, I'm more than happy to like sit alongside them. And it's almost like David versus Goliath. And the more of us who are doing this well, the more likely it is that things are going to get through to companies. So there's a lot of really cool companies out there. Where HumanOS is different is two things. A lot of our competitors, like I said, will only focus on the downside, so like the anxiety, the stress, or they'll look at it from a very siloed perspective. So you'll have nutritionists, or you have therapists, you'll have personal trainers, you have sleep experts. We have everything. And what we also do differently is that integration of the human and the technology.
Yeah.
Hence the name.
Yeah.
And that's not what many are doing. It's a harder model. You know, you can have all this technology and you have a really scalable platform and it can look amazing. But my problem with that is if that form of coaching and support worked, everyone would use YouTube for their problems.
Yeah, right.
You need a human.
Yeah.
Then you have the other side of it, which is all human coaching, which again, that's great, but then there's no added value to the business of actually understanding the data. And so you're not fixing the problem of building long-term well-being and performance strategies.
Yeah.
So we sort of sit at the interjunction of those two things, of where we're trying to create the data and the strategy, but then we're also trying to have this holistic approach with all the coaches.
Yeah. Per its name, HumanOS seems very human-centric, kind of people to people. But do you see a place for the booming technology of AI and things like that to come in and further extend what the platform can do?
Yeah, 100%. I think AI is absolutely incredible, and I have big plans for it and how it's going to optimize our user journey, optimize our customer journey, how it's going to take a lot of the legwork off the coaching side of things and really automate a lot and remove room for human error. But fundamentally, at the bottom and the crux of everything we do, it has to be that human-to-human connection, because that's what humans need, and that's only becoming more and more evident as we go into this more and more technologically advanced world. And so that will never be replaced for me. It will always just be optimized by the technology.
Yeah. You know, mentioning all the awards that you've won made me think to myself, in the future, you're going to have to do your own award, the HumanOS award, and just host it globally. Have a leaderboard company to company.
Yeah.
Who's performing
Love
best.
that. Oh my gosh, you got so many good ideas for me today. Love that. Can we
is a good
share
one.
him?
We'll do that. No, I'm just joking. HumanOS
Just start
leaderboard.
monetizing this somehow.
Yeah, totally. But also, you know, I think in the wearable side of things, you know, it seems to me like everyone using an Apple Watch or whatever, like they're using, but they've probably bought that with their own personal money and stuff like that. You know, for a small band or something corporate and professional that can be worn with a suit that looks cool. Because that's the only reason that stops me from wearing an Apple Watch is my vanity and the straps Velcro.
Do you not get an Aura ring?
No,
Do they work well?
They do work. Yeah, they do work relatively well. Pretty
So
well.
people
One of
could
the
use their
better ones.
Aura ring to collect
Yeah.
data that they put into the platform.
We connect Aura, Fitbit, Whoop, Apple, you know, all the big ones we are integrated with.
Yeah. Great. Really cool. I think it's going to be, I'm quite excited to carry on watching what happens next. I think that, you know, so long as, to me, it seems that the companies, because companies are companies and there's sort of no morality in economics, I'd say, I'm really interested to see, and I hope that it is the case, that companies see the value to themselves and to their employees with what you're doing. That really excites me, and I love the way the platform looks so far. I think considering this is the first tech startup you've built, it freaks us out how good the platform is. So
I can't take credit for that, but I just tell them what it needs and then they go and make the magic happen.
But you've chosen the right people to do it, and that is.
Is there a pushback though on, you know, like a generational thing? You know, the amount of times I've said, "Oh, Mum, you can have my old Apple Watch or my Fitbit," and she's like, "No, I don't want to know about that." So is there a generational pushback to analytics?
Every office has got that guy who's proud to be unfit.
Still uses a sundial to wake up in the morning, you know, that guy.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating. We're living in this time where we're seeing the most generational difference in the workforce. People are coming in younger and people are staying in for longer. And also we're seeing the most difference in the approach to work and what a career looks like. It is no longer you go into one workplace in one industry, you stay there, you work your way up over many decades, and then you retire. It is a case of you can go into one industry, do 10 years there, go into the next, do 10 years there, try freelancing, be a founder, realize that grass isn't greener, go back to the corporate world. Not speaking from experience there, hopefully. And so the challenge is actually, you know, there is right approaches from both. If what the older generations did was correct, we wouldn't be seeing the health issues and problems we are. If what the younger generations were doing is correct, everyone would be the CEO next week, and we wouldn't see resilience where it is and loneliness where it is. And actually, and it's very quick to you can blame either group, but neither group are wrong. And actually, if you can get those two groups to communicate effectively, within that is the right approach to work. And so you're always going to get people who think, no, not for me, don't want that. And, you know, you'd never see 100% engagement rate, and that's okay. But actually, it's as long as you're getting to the people who need it and you're starting to create a momentum shift, in a cultural shift in the way people approach it. And I also think as it becomes more normalized to speak about these things, there's a lot of people who may not have necessarily spoke about it before, but are seeing huge benefit from it. I remember I gave a talk at Cambridge University for all their faculty at the beginning of last year. And so I had everyone in there, from receptionists to gardeners to janitors to top University of Cambridge professors. Lol. And I was giving a talk on resilience. I gave it like 5 times, 5 days in a row. And I went back about 3 months later because I was doing one of my talks for the students around stress management. And this man came up to me, and he was in his 70s, and he's worked at the University of Cambridge for decades. And he came up to me and he's like, "I'm so happy I've seen you." And I was like, "Oh, thank you. I wish everyone said that to me as I walked down the street." I was like, "Why?" He's like, "I came to your talk on resilience a few months ago." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "I went home after that talk and I had a conversation with my wife that I've never been able to have. And since those conversations, I've now implemented and got help for a few things, and I've never felt this happy." It's the first time in my life I realized that what depression is and how I can change it and have those conversations with people who love me, and my life in 3 months has changed. And for me, that was like a moment in my life where I was like, this is why I do this. Because actually it just shows, like, even people in their 70s, males in their 70s, who stereotypically you're like, you know, they just go like, thick skin, like, man up, whatever these silly terms are. Actually, no, they want help. They want to feel good just like anyone else. So if you can connect with them and give them that ability to think about it a little bit differently, or to lower that barrier of entry to them so they can go and have those meaningful connections, they can actually change and transform their lives at whatever age you are.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, it comes back to that education piece. It's how are you doing it? How are you getting people engaged? How are you talking to them? How are you meeting them at where they're at so that they can feel the benefits? And then again, you are able to reach a lot of people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's what you've said about reaching the people who need it really resonates with me. And it's such a common story that somebody is struggling within an organization that they actually love overall, but the day-to-day work is getting on top of them. And then traditionally, they would be kind of guided or encouraged to talk to the HR department about their problems and about feeling overwhelmed. But the HR department presents as the company itself, the company you're working for. And so it's a very conflicted conversation to have, to reveal your vulnerabilities. Yeah. And that's what the team want. They want a sort of third trusted party who's working on behalf of the company but is separate to them and doesn't share, you know, their problems. So I think you'll really do that. You'll really hit the people that need it. And yeah, and I wish you the best of luck with it too, because it's an exciting vision, and it plays well into everyone's favours.
I'm excited for you too as well. 3.
Well, Lawrence has given you all our good ideas, so there's not much left for us now, to be honest.
I don't have time to execute them. We can do it together.
It has been wonderful talking to you today, Bianca.
No,
Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Awesome.